you actually become the drug, not even a human being.
Darrell Brooks, now serving a life sentence for killing 6 people in the Waukesha parade tragedy, featured in a documentary about meth use. We discuss the drug and Brooks's behavior. I'm Angenette Levy, and welcome to Law and Crime's Sidebar podcast. Darrell Brooks is now serving 6 consecutive life sentences plus 700 years for that awful incident in November of last year, where he drove his SUV through barricades and into the Christmas parade in Waukesha, Wisconsin. 6 people were killed, including an 8-year-old boy, and dozens more were injured. It was a really awful thing that traumatized the entire community there in Waukesha. If you watched the trial, you saw that the behavior of Darrell Brooks was anything but normal. He turned the entire trial into a complete spectacle. He represented himself. He fought with the judge. He did all kinds of things. Listen as Brooks talks about his meth use and how it made him feel. This was in the Crystal Darkness documentary.
I wasn't a human anymore. I was just something vile, disgusting, despicable. I could go on, I could use a lot of words, but that's what I became.
So joining me to discuss this and Darrell Brooks's behavior and methamphetamine is Julie Goldberg. She is a licensed addiction counselor. Julie, welcome to Sidebar. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
We are glad to have you. Tell us, first of all, for those of our listeners and viewers who may not know, what is methamphetamine?
Meth is a stimulant and it's a drug. It can be smoked, it can be snorted, it can be ingested in a pill form or injected using an IV drug use. And it causes extreme spikes in dopamine to the brain, among other things. So extreme euphoria. Sometimes when people use it, they also experience hallucinations, delusions. The hallucinations can be auditory and visual.
What are the long-term effects of meth?
It depends on how long someone's using it, how often they're using it. Usually when someone goes through withdrawal and stops using meth, they have chronic fatigue, they sleep for a really long time, they're very depleted, and then over time they can start experiencing long-term impacts mentally, like increase in paranoia, increase in hallucinations, increase in delusions, potentially. It's not for every person, but sometimes that is happening.
Can it cause changes to your brain even using it for a short time?
Yep. So research shows that because meth increases dopamine in the brain, when you're not using it, you actually have decrease in dopamine. So over time, you can have decrease in dopamine in the brain and increase in hallucination and delusions and paranoia. Again, it's not for all people, but for many, that's what they experience.
And I know you've never met Darrell Brooks, of course. You've never treated him, so you can't diagnose him. But we had heard some talk and discussion during the court proceedings that the judge said she had, ordered competency evaluations for him. He was deemed competent to stand trial. She said the only thing that showed up was the fact that he had some personality disorder type things going on. So when somebody has mental health issues, such as maybe a personality disorder, I mean, could drug use exacerbate those things, those tendencies or those traits?
Oh, 100%. And again, I don't know him. I didn't work with him, but especially in males, if they're using drugs at an early age, it can increase the likelihood of long-term mental health issues. Usually it's before the age of 26, but again, with males, the likelihood of long-term mental health implications increases with drug use. Yeah.
Do you often find, well, let's go to the male part. Why in males versus maybe females?
I think males exhibit the behavior more commonly than women do. Often sometimes women are experiencing those things as well, but they're not expressing it outwardly in society. So perhaps the research is just done more on males because they're displaying the behavior more. And I don't actually know why. It's just what it is. I think schizophrenia is more common in males. I'm thinking of research that's connected to schizophrenia in particular.
Sure. And just to be clear, we don't know of any schizophrenia diagnosis with Darrell Brooks. One thing that I find interesting, and it's funny that we're sitting here having this conversation because I've done a lot of stories about drug use over the years, whether it's methamphetamine or heroin, fentanyl, things of that nature. And my mom also happens to be uh, an addiction counselor, just like you are. So we've had these conversations many times over the years. And she always told me that basically a lot of people self-medicate. People who might have some mental health problems self-medicate by using drugs, or they use a drug to make themselves feel either better or normal, what have you. So do you see that in your practice?
Oh yeah, I all the time. I don't think you can work with drug addiction and not take, I would say, a trauma lens. So most people in my practice, and when I worked in a detox center, most people that I've worked with have experienced trauma in their past, and they're using substances to soothe and ease that trauma, the pain associated with it.
So, I mean, what are the long-term effects? You know, you said of meth, there could be delusions, paranoia, things of that nature. When I watched that clip of Darrell Brooks, he seemed very normal. You know, he's incarcerated. I'm assuming he has no drugs in his system because he is incarcerated. So, I mean, somebody like him who has personality disorders, even though you haven't diagnosed him or examined him, we want to be very clear about that. What could it do to somebody like that?
Well, in my experience with meth users, when I'm talking about hallucinations and delusions, it's often people, I'm hesitant to say people, it's something telling them to do something. So often people are controlled by the voices that they're hearing. And those voices cause a lot of paranoia. Imagine if you were going throughout your life and you're hearing someone telling you to do something or not to trust someone, or you're being watched or scanned. And I was hesitant to say people telling them to do something because often it is a religious figure. Jesus is really common for some reason among meth users. Sometimes it's aliens telling them to do certain things. I've experienced people often also saying that the FBI is communicating with them. So it's people, but it's also historical figures and then organizations as well. And that's one thing that could happen. So voices are telling them to do something. They're experiencing a lot of paranoia and confusion around that. And then their behavior can change and fluctuate based on what's going on.
Are those people more people who suffer from schizophrenia, though, the ones you're referring to?
No.
No? Oh,
Um,
okay. So
no, oh,
people,
yeah.
just meth users
No,
may
it's a
experience
really
these
good
things.
question, right? Because it sounds like schizophrenia, but no, it's just people that are either using meth or have used meth long term, and that's a side effect of it. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I think it's pretty wild that we've seen this documentary kind of come to light, showing him seemingly acting normal. I hate to use that word because normal can be different things for different people, but he's sitting there, he's talking about his drug use and being quite candid and saying he turns into something terrible. And I do want to say, you know, we heard no testimony or evidence that he was under the influence of meth at the time that this happened, that the time that he plowed this car into the parade. It's just a terrible thing. And we should note that the judge in this case also said that she just thinks he's evil. That's all she thinks. Yeah, it's interesting. She said she had him evaluated. He has personality disorders, and she thinks he's evil. You know, he got mad and did whatever. So it was quite the ordeal. Julie Goldberg, addiction counselor, thank you so much for coming on to talk with us about this. We really appreciate it, you offering your time and your expertise.
Thank you.
And that's it for this edition of Law and Crime Sidebar Podcast. It is produced by Sam Goldberg and Logan Harris. Bobby Szoke is our YouTube manager. Alyssa Fisher handles our bookings, and Kiara Bronson does our social media. You can listen to and download Sidebar anytime on Apple, Spotify, Google, and wherever else you get your podcasts. And of course, you can always watch it on Law and Crime's YouTube channel. I'm Angenette Levy, and we will see you next time.